the awareness of God's presence. Let us pray. Father, Mother God, we give thanks. We give thanks for this opportunity to be open to the awareness of your presence in this moment. We use this moment as practice, that we may be aware of your presence in each moment, in every circumstance, in every hour of the day. We give thanks. And for this sacred moment of remembrance, together we say, Amen. Two glasses of water today, that's good. My control of the universe, that's good. The clock reads 3:33. It does. I wonder if that's half of 6:66. So, you ready for Christmas? Yeah? Got all your shopping done? Are you in a state of peace? The right medicine. The right medicine. So, we've been talking about, oh, by the way, I came out here with a pocket full of these so that I would remember to mention it. For those of you who have volunteered in this last year, we have mementos for your service. They're right here. Please pick them up. You know who you are, who has served. Several weeks ago we gave those out, and those have been sitting on my desk since. So now they're not on my desk. All right. So in this Advent season, this preparation for the arrival of that awareness of the Christ in each of us, we have these topics that we discuss each year. In the Advent season, we talk about faith, we talk about peace, we talk about love, we talk about joy. And this second week of Advent, we are speaking of peace. Peace as the right medicine. I was reminded this week that when, last week I came out here with this severe cough, and I was given the right medicine. Turns out this cough drop. No, it turns out I'm good, but I did order some. Melaleuca. How many of you have heard of that company? They're an online products wellness company. Turns out you can't call them up and buy product from them. No, that would be too simple. No, you have to contact a local reseller. Well, I can understand that business model, okay? But as I was attempting to get cough drops this week, I was finding myself not at peace. Because I needed to have someone to buy them from. Turns out that that Lynn at Journeys for Conscious Living is an active reseller of Melaleuca products. So I've been able to get my supply of cough drops. But I'll tell you, those things are really good. You saw the transformation from my not being able to speak to just a few licks on that, and I was good to go. So. Not that I'm here, I don't have any stock in the company, I'm not a reseller, but if you want to have a good cough drop, that's a good one. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I tried to buy them from Kay, but it you couldn't? Oh, okay, all right. My apologies, Okay, so I was not at peace. And I realized, of course, as I usually do, I mean, I am a teacher of this stuff. At some point in time, my teaching do come to the fro in my consciousness, and I say, oh, well, that really is my choice, isn't it, to be at peace or to not be at peace. So I chose to be at peace. Well, it turns out that as we look around our life experience, we see conflict everywhere. I mean, today, it turns out, is the 73rd anniversary of what? Pearl Harbor. And, of course, Pearl Harbor was the beginning of our involvement in World War II. And that war had uncountable casualties, both people who were killed as well as people who were injured, as well as people whose lives were transformed and not for what we would consider to be the good. And we see scars of that war. But since then, we have had the Korean conflict. We have had the Vietnam War. We have had Lebanon. We have had the Gulf War. We've had all of these conflicts, Afghanistan and the Iraq War, and now we see the arising of ISIL and the threat that it is making in the Levant. And our prescription for the resolution of these conflicts has been, historically, almost every time, I will bring up one where it wasn't the case, but almost every time, the resolution to the conflict has been to get together your resources, to set up your alliances, and then to plunge headlong into conflict. And the question is, how successful has that been? We have one situation where a people were oppressed by an imperial power, and the choice was made by the movement leaders that they were not going to fight the oppression with conflict. What was that? India and Gandhi. And Gandhi has, in fact, become a teacher for us today and a teacher for us into the future. In fact, the internal conflicts that we have had, the civil rights movement, the leaders of the civil rights movement studied Gandhi's approach. Martin Luther King went to India in the mid-50s to determine what it was that Gandhi was able to do to cause that arising and the shift of power from this seemingly insurmountable force of the British Empire. Well, as we look at the solutions that we have attempted, and as we have seen one example of conflict being addressed not by violence, but by nonviolence, and we can look at the civil rights movement, and we can say that the civil rights movement has made substantial progress. But we still have work to do. However, the work that needs to be done is not violent opposition, but rather nonviolent continuation of the nonviolent solution. So, as we look at this concept of peace, we can look at the causes of lack of peace, and we can look at the solutions to that lack of peace. And we recognize that, as I said last week, the resolution of conflict is all about frame of mind. And the frame of mind is strictly an internal experience, right? We can be in the midst of great conflict and have a frame of mind that is peaceful, and our experience will be peaceful. Even if the bullets are flying, our experience, if our frame of mind is peaceful, our experience will be peaceful. And so we can argue about the effectiveness of nonviolence at the nation-state level, and we can say, well, okay, here's the evidence, here are the situations that have arisen, and here is the outcome. For instance, we can look at the present rising of ISIL, and we can see that, well, in fact, some analysts have said that the reason that ISIL has the power it has right now and the resources that it has right now goes back to 2003. May the 16th, 2003, when the Provisional Authority in Iraq issued the edict that the Ba'athist employees of the state of Iraq will be banned from government work. Now, what did that do? That took virtually all of the expertise out of the key positions in Iraq, out of the governing of the state of Iraq. Not all Ba'athists were Saddam Hussein. Not all Ba'athists had that attitude of execute your enemies. But in effect, banning the Ba'athists from the Iraq reconstruction, took the expertise out of that reconstruction, and it created enemies, particularly in the military. When the military officers were not allowed to continue their profession, they became unemployed. And being unable to work in government because they were Ba'athists, they became street vendors. They became laborers. They became individuals that, perhaps highly trained, are now destitute. So when the coalescing of this terrorist group in the Syrian conflict arose and started to spread into Iraq, they had a ready audience, these ex-Ba'athists. And the military officers, who were very experienced, are now working in this terrorist group. So what has happened? When we excluded the Ba'athists from the Iraq reconstruction, what we did was we set up the conflict that we're now experiencing. This is not a political science class. And I use that as an example, a very stark example of what happens when we try to resolve conflict with power. Let us look at an alternative, and that is the example of India. There was a situation as the movement was starting to coalesce. There was a situation where the people who were very active, the activists of this movement, gathered in a stadium that to hear a speech and to give speeches. And the British blocked the exits and entered with machine guns and cannons and massacred all of those people that were gathered. Hundreds of people were killed. Because the British felt that what they needed to do was they needed to put down this movement, and they needed to do it with unopposable force. And the outcome was that the world became involved. And the British Empire had just written its own warrant. Well, so how do we resolve conflict? When we have a difference of opinion with someone, we are setting the stage for conflict. But we can make that first step in that when we recognize the difference of opinion, we can make that first step and say, well, here's my opinion. Here's the other person's opinion. I wonder what value their position holds. Can I see this from their perspective? Can I look at it in their shoes? We have Scripture that offers us some advice in this, and it's in Matthew. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. Whew! That's some of the most difficult advice to follow, is it not? When you have an opinion, and someone offers a different opinion, now believe me, I have personal experience with this, so I know where I'm coming from. When you have an opinion and someone holds a different opinion, what is your first reaction if you're not enlightened? That some of you may be enlightened, so I don't want you to answer. But those of us who are not enlightened, what is our first position? Our first position is, well, obviously, they don't see it my way. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put together my arguments, and I'm going to array my logic, and I'm going to lay this on them in such a way that they will see the error of their thinking. Now, I may also say, you idiot, and then try to convince them. And I may say that directly, or it may be my tone of voice, or it may just be the way I present. Now, from the other's perspective, I hold an opinion that is different from this person's opinion. Now, this person may have a great deal of sound logic to justify their position, but nonetheless, this is the position I hold. So what is my reaction going to be? Well, you, right? I'm sorry, did I offend anyone there? Okay. So there is, in just this first step, there is already the building of the walls, the aligning of sights of the weapons for the opposing wall, to make sure that my position is going to dominate. And then it escalates from there. So in that first step, if we instead take the position of, that's interesting, I wonder how that feels from the other side. Do not resist an evildoer. Do not resist someone who holds that other opinion, because obviously their thinking is incorrect. But nonetheless, what is it that causes them to hold that position? Why do they think as they do? And to be able to do that in the midst of the argument is a highly elevated consciousness that is required. Would you not agree? And our position is typically to take the low road rather than the high road. To array our resources, to set up our arguments, and to then confront in the attempt to overwhelm with unopposable force. Turn the other cheek also. You know, an interesting observation was made by a classmate of mine. It totally escaped me, but it makes so much sense. When you are looking this way and you turn the cheek, you're getting a different perspective, are you not? So when it's to turn the other cheek, it's not just to expose yourself for more abuse, but rather to take a different look at it, to look at the situation from a different perspective, to put yourself in the position of the person who is in opposition to you early on, before the arguments are arrayed, before the resources are mustered, before the alliances are built. And allow yourself in that time of quiet consideration of the two positions to consider. Well, we've got this, and I'd like you to take a look at how Paul refers to this. I told you last week that I have a low regard for Paul's advice, usually, because Paul comes out of the Judaic tradition. And he takes this, and he conveys it this way in Romans. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought of what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves. All well and good thus far, right? Here's where the change comes in. But leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. That's in Deuteronomy. No, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. You will heap burning coals on their heads. That's actually the origin of this aphorism, forgive your enemies, because it will confuse them. Okay, so this idea that Paul brings forth is one that God is out there and separate, and God will avenge the wrongs. You don't have to, because God will take care of that. Now, what's wrong with this idea? Seems like, that's only 5% of that whole passage. It's not a very long addendum to what Jesus has offered. But here's what's wrong with that. A couple of weeks ago, on a Sunday afternoon, I was heading home listening to, I think it was Radio Lab on NPR. And there was a series on there about fight churches. Have you heard about fight churches? Fight churches are primarily evangelical churches that sponsor mixed martial arts in their community. Cages. People come up with some kind of protection on their wrists, I suppose, to keep from breaking their hand. And they wail on each other. And the reason why this is supported by these churches is that, as it was reported in this segment, that it prepares the individuals to be soldiers for God. Soldiers for God. To be able to fight the devil, to be able to fight evil, to be able to overcome with overwhelming force those who oppose you. Fight churches. How many of you have heard of Mark Driscoll at Mars Hill in Seattle? Correction. Used to be with Mars Hill. Mars Hill was an evangelical church that rose in just a matter of years from a community of 75 meeting in a home to 5 campuses of thousands and thousands of people gathering on a Sunday. And Mark Driscoll, was the pastor of Mars Hill. And he was one of the first proponents of Fight Church. My niece was a participant, not in the fighting, but she was a participant in that church and thought that Mark Driscoll was just the epitome of a spiritual leader, a religious leader. And it turns out that Mars Hill is no more. He had to resign because of the way he confronted his associate ministers and staff in such a way as to be so overbearing that they finally, the council that led these campuses of churches finally said, "You've got to change." And he resigned. Upon resignation, all of the churches, the council decided to let all of the churches take on their own responsibility, their own independence. So there are now 5 large evangelical churches in the Northwest, but nonetheless, this concept that was promoted by Mark Driscoll, and the concept is still in place, a Fight Church, but this concept is one where I don't get it. Can you understand that? It's based upon this idea that God is out there as an avenging deity that needs His soldiers here on earth to fight the devil. Well, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think it's going to work because the devil doesn't exist out there. The devil exists here. The devil is the ego, that aspect of consciousness which insists upon separation from each other and from God. And it is that ego that insists upon my position is the right position. It is the ego that resists the argument of how does the other person view this? How does my opposition see it? Why is my opposition so ensconced in their position? You see, it's the ego, in evangelical terms, the devil. It's the ego which is our opposition. It's not the other person. It's that aspect of consciousness which insists upon separation. That's what we must overcome. And as I said last week, there is a reason for the ego, and the reason for the ego is to allow us that separation from God so that we can gain a perspective and thus appreciate God. But when the ego dominates our consciousness, that's when we get into trouble. That's when we are disallowed from approaching the divine. That's when we are barred from that reunion with God. And it is the reunion with God which is the spiritual quest. So, how do we make that step early on? Or how do we make the step later on? I mean, if we can't, if we must do it only in that first position, then there are so many things that get past that first position because of what someone said. Oh, well, I'll show you. Because of our pre-established opinions, because of our vested interests. If we can't resolve this later down the pike, is there any hope? Well, I suggest that there is, because you can resolve it down the pike. Even when you are fully invested in a position of opposition with some other person or some other group, you can still take a step back. And here's the way you do it. We have in unity, we have these 5 principles. I call them 5 pillars of faith. But we have, first of all, the premise that there is one power and one presence. We have the proposition. The proposition is that deity, the Son of God, is present in each and every one of us. We have the process, and the process is that the thoughts that we hold in mind become manifest in our experience. They determine what our responses to the events of our lives are about. And so this process is one that we can actually pay attention to. We can't do much about the premise. That's given. We can't do much about the proposition. In fact, we're going to be proving the proposition as we go through this. But the process is something that we can specifically control. How? Through the practice. The practice of prayer and meditation, affirmation and denials. Those are the means by which we practice. And then the promise. And the promise is that if we practice these things, if we apply all of these things that we have given in these prior 4 principles, we will have an extraordinary life. Okay, so the practice. The practice of prayer and meditation. We sometimes think of those as separate things, but actually Unity has a 5-step prayer process. And that 5-step prayer process is relax. Relax. Let go. Allow yourself to let go of all of the baggage that you have pulled into this moment. And once you relax, then concentrate. Concentrate on being present here and now. And once you're concentrating on the present moment, then meditate. Allow yourself to go into the silence. Allow yourself to be in that space of quiet. And the 4th step is embrace the silence. Feel that silence, that warm embrace of the silence. And the 5th step is to give thanks. Now, notice that nowhere in this is there a statement of your request. In the 5-step prayer process, there is no place for, oh God, please change this. Oh God, this is obviously an overlooked, you obviously overlooked this. And because I am here as your soldier on earth, I have recognized what needs to be changed. And, well, I'll just itemize them for you. Okay, God? So, there it is. I've given you the 5 requests. Now, do it. Nowhere in this prayer process is that recommended. Relax, concentrate, meditate and embrace the silence, and give thanks. As you do that, as you allow yourself to step into that silence, you will cut the tethers of the material world. You will release your objectives. You will let go of your position. And you will allow yourself to be open to the consideration of other. It's required that you let go in order to do that. You know about the monkey trap, right? The monkey trap, actually real. You have a jar of nuts. And the jar of nuts is such that the neck of the jar is large enough to allow a hand to go in, a monkey hand, and not large enough to allow a full hand to come out. So what happens is that the monkey will reach in for those delectable nuts and grab a hand and try to pull out, and unwilling to let go, it is there available for anyone that wants to come by and take it. We're like that monkey. We've got these delectable nuts, and we're not going to let it go. Whether those delectable nuts are thoughts or values or whatever, we're not going to let it go. And as a result, what happens is that we are trapped. We're trapped by the ego. And we are proven, thought after thought, action after action, that we are separate and apart, and we need to grab for all we can get before someone else does so. Relax, concentrate, meditate. Embrace the silence and allow that silence to transform your limited perspective. Turn the other cheek. Let go. Let God. And give thanks. Give thanks for all that is, for all that isn't, all that was, all that wasn't, all that will be, and all that won't be. Give thanks. Be transformed. Allow yourself to be the Gandhi of the moment. We'll have our meditation. As we enter this moment, let us let go of the nuts. Withdraw our hand from the jar and sit quietly. Let go of our opinions. Let go of our perspectives. Yes, even let go of our values. So that we may enter into the space of the other. So that we may better understand the other. Bring to mind some conflict that is present in your experience right now. And allow for the moment the proposition that the conflict was totally your doing. That no one else had anything to do with the conflict except by your words and your actions. You don't have to share that with anybody. Just allow that as a possibility for right now. And with that frame of mind, consider the position of the other. What is the other's hopes? Dreams. What is the other trying to accomplish? What are the fears that are held by the other? What drives the other? What motivates the other to hold the position he or she holds? Not necessary to agree with any of those values or opinions or motivations, intentions that are held by the other. Agreement is not necessary, just understanding. Now look upon that perspective. Look at the perspective of the other. And see how you might contribute to releasing their fear, to supporting their quest, to helping them find fulfillment in the moment. Let go of the idea that this is defeat and realize that this is what you're called here to do. To help be the resolution of the conflict. To bring peace of mind. To be the instrument of God in this moment. To allow peace to cover the land. One conflict at a time. Feel how that would feel to be the bringer of peace. Feel how fulfilling that mission would be. Become God's emissary, not God's soldier. As we come back into this time and space, let us come back sharing the words of the Lord's Prayer.